Hi everyone, welcome to the channel After All That Years.
I never thought I'd be the type of man to sit in a lawyer's office at 62, signing papers to end a marriage that lasted nearly half my life. But here I am, and the strangest part is how quiet everything feels now. Like the world finally stopped holding its breath. It's funny how you can live with someone for so long and miss the exact moment they become a stranger. With Janet, I think it happened gradually, the way a photograph fades when you leave it in sunlight too long. One day you notice the colors aren't quite right anymore, but by then it's too late to remember what it used to look like. We'd been married 15 years when the cracks really started showing. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. Let me back up and tell you how a decent marriage turns into something you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. Janet and I met at a company picnic back in '08. She was working in marketing for a firm downtown, and I was just a middle manager trying to make conversation by the potato salad. She had this way of throwing her head back when she laughed, really laughed, not just the polite chuckle most people give you. I was hooked before I even knew her last name. The early years were good. Better than good, actually. We had our routines. Sunday morning coffee and crossword puzzles, Friday night takeout from that Chinese place on 5th Street, weekend trips to visit her sister in Portland. Janet was always the more social one, the one who remembered birthdays and organized dinner parties. I was content to handle the bills and keep the house running while she lit up every room she entered. But somewhere around year 12, those Sunday mornings started feeling different. I'd be sitting there with my coffee, working on 7 across, and I'd look up to find Janet staring out the window with this distant expression. When I'd ask what she was thinking about, she'd just shrug and say, "Nothing much," before disappearing into her phone. The phone thing started slowly. At first, it was just work emails that couldn't wait until Monday. Then it became constant texting during dinner, little smiles at messages she wouldn't share. I told myself it was probably her sister or one of her girlfriends from book club. Janet had always been a communicator. The real wake-up call came about 8 months ago. Janet had been working late more often. At least, that's what she told me. I'd gotten used to eating dinner alone, watching the evening news with just the dog for company. Our old retriever, Buster, seemed to sense the tension, too. He'd sit by the front door around 7 o'clock, waiting for her car in the driveway, and when she finally came home after 9, he'd barely lift his head from his bed. One Thursday evening, I decided to surprise her with dinner from that Italian place she loved. I drove to her office building, thinking I'd catch her before she left for whatever meeting was keeping her so busy. The parking lot was nearly empty. Her car wasn't there. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, telling myself she must have driven to the meeting straight from work. But something in my gut knew better. When she came home that night, humming and checking her reflection in the hallway mirror, I asked how the meeting went. "Oh, you know how these things are," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Lots of talking, not much accomplished. That was when I started paying attention to the small things. How she'd shower immediately after walking through the door. How she'd gotten suddenly interested in the gym, buying new workout clothes and talking about getting back in shape. How she'd started wearing perfume to work, something she'd never done in all the years I'd known her. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in March. I'd made pancakes, something I used to do every weekend when we were younger. Janet came downstairs in her robe, phone already in hand, and sat across from me at the kitchen table. I was trying to tell her about something funny that happened with Buster during his walk when she held up her hand. "Can you just give me a minute? I need to respond to this." Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, and I caught a glimpse of her expression. She was smiling, but not the way she smiled at my stories or when we watched old movies together. This was different, intimate. "Who's texting you at 8 in the morning on a Saturday?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She looked up sharply, and for just a second, I saw something like panic flash across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by that cool, distant look I'd been seeing more often lately. It's work stuff, James. You wouldn't understand. Work stuff. At 8 on a Saturday morning, while she sat there in her bathrobe, smiling like a teenager with her first crush. I set down my fork. Janet, what's going on with us? She finally put the phone face down on the table, but her hand stayed close to it, like she was afraid it might disappear. What do you mean? I mean, we barely talk anymore. You're never here, and when you are, you're somewhere else entirely. I gestured toward the phone. I feel like I'm living with a stranger. She leaned back in her chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. People change, James. We're not the same people we were 15 years ago. I know that, but it feels like you're pulling away from everything we built together. From me. Maybe I need some space to figure things out. Space. The word hit me like cold water. What kind of space? I don't know yet. I just know that sometimes I feel trapped. Like I'm suffocating in our routine. Suffocating. In the life we'd built together. In the home where we'd been happy. In the marriage I thought we were both committed to. I wanted to argue, to fight for us, to demand an explanation for the late nights and the secretive phone calls. Instead, I just nodded and started clearing the dishes. What do you say to someone who tells you they're suffocating in your presence? That night, I slept in the guest room. Not because we'd fought, exactly, but because I couldn't lie next to her and pretend everything was fine. I stared at the ceiling until nearly 3, listening to her moving around in our bedroom, the soft sounds of her getting ready for bed. I wondered if she was relieved to have the space to herself. The next few weeks were a strange kind of dance. We were polite, careful around each other. Janet kept up her late nights and mysterious phone calls, but she seemed more relaxed about hiding them, like she'd gotten permission to stop pretending. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office and volunteering for weekend projects. It was easier than going home to a house that felt more like a hotel lobby than the place where I'd planned to grow old with my wife. One evening in early April, I came home to find Janet packing a suitcase. My heart jumped. Going somewhere? I asked from the doorway. She glanced up, not stopping her careful folding. Girls' weekend. Amy's been planning it for months. Amy was her college roommate, lived up in Seattle now. They'd done these trips before, but something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the way Janet was packing. More clothes than usual, including the red dress she'd bought last month and never worn. When will you be back? Sunday night. Maybe Monday morning if we decide to extend it. Monday morning. That was new. I watched her zip the suitcase closed, noting how she'd included the expensive perfume she'd started wearing, the new lingerie I'd glimpsed in her drawer. For a girls' weekend with Amy, who'd been married to the same guy for 20 years, and whose idea of excitement was trying a new wine at dinner. Have fun, I said, and meant it. At least one of us should be happy. She kissed my cheek before leaving, a quick, distracted peck that felt more like an afterthought than goodbye. I stood at the window and watched her car disappear down our street, then spent the weekend working in the garage and taking Buster on longer walks than usual. Janet came home Sunday night glowing. There's no other word for it. Her skin had a warmth to it, and she moved differently, like she was carrying some delicious secret. She unpacked quickly, showered, and went straight to bed, claiming exhaustion from all the girl time. Pity, but I'd seen her phone screen light up while she was in the bathroom, seen her grab it immediately when she came out. Whoever had been texting her all weekend, it wasn't Amy. That's when I made a decision that probably makes me a terrible husband, but I was desperate to understand what was happening to my marriage. The next Tuesday, while Janet was at work, I did something I'd never done before. I went through her computer. She'd left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, something that would have been unthinkable just a year ago. The email program was still running, and I told myself I was just going to close it. But then I saw a name I didn't recognize in her recent messages. Kevin. My hands shook as I opened the conversation thread. What I found there made me sick to my stomach and explained everything I'd been trying not to see for months. The messages went back nearly 6 months. They started professional. Kevin was apparently a client at Janet's firm, but quickly became personal, then flirtatious, then explicit. I read about their lunch meetings that turned into afternoon coffee dates, about how Janet felt alive again when she was with him, about weekend trips that definitely weren't girls' weekends with Amy, about how I was nice enough, but predictable, and how Janet had outgrown our marriage. There were photos, not the kind I ever expected to see my wife sending to another man. I sat there at my own kitchen table, reading about how boring my wife found me, how she'd been pretending to be happy for years, how Kevin made her feel like herself again. Each message was another knife in what I thought I knew about my life. The worst part wasn't even the affair itself. It was reading Janet's version of our marriage, a narrative where I was the anchor dragging her down, where our quiet contentment was actually stifling boredom, where everything I thought we'd built together was just something she'd been tolerating. I closed the laptop and sat there for a long time, staring at the kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals, where we'd planned vacations and discussed dreams and argued about whose turn it was to take out the garbage. All of it, according to Janet's messages to Kevin, had been a lie. When she came home that evening, I was sitting in the living room with a glass of whiskey, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with what I'd learned. "You're drinking," she observed, setting down her purse. "Long day," I said. She disappeared into the kitchen, probably to start dinner. We still maintained the pretense of normal domestic life, even though we both knew something fundamental had shifted. Over dinner, take out Chinese, because neither of us had bothered to cook, I studied my wife's face. She looked the same as always, brown hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on her nose as she scrolled through her phone between bites. But now I knew what she was looking at, who she was smiling at. "How's work?" I asked. "Busy. Lots of new clients." She didn't look up from her phone. New clients like Kevin, I thought, but didn't say. That night, I lay awake planning my next move. I could confront her, demand an explanation, fight for our marriage. Or I could let her continue living her double life while I figured out what I wanted from whatever was left of us. I chose a third option. I decided to give Janet exactly what she said she wanted: space. The next morning, I got up before she did and left for work without our usual goodbye. I didn't text her during the day to check in, didn't ask about dinner plans. When I came home that evening, I went straight to the garage to work on an old cabinet I'd been refinishing, staying out there until I heard her go to bed. It took her 3 days to notice the change. "You've been quiet lately," she said over breakfast on Friday. I looked up from my coffee and newspaper. "Have I? Is everything okay?" I wanted to laugh. Was everything okay? My wife had been having an affair for 6 months, had been lying to me about weekend trips and working late, had been telling another man that our marriage was a prison she needed to escape. But she was asking if I was okay, because I hadn't been chatting about my day or asking about hers. "I'm fine," I said, "just tired." She studied my face for a moment, then shrugged and went back to her phone. Even her concern was half-hearted. Over the next few weeks, I maintained my new routine. I was polite but distant, present but not engaged. I stopped asking about her day, stopped suggesting weekend activities, stopped trying to connect with the woman who'd made it clear that connection with me was suffocating. The strange thing was how easy it became. Once I stopped investing emotional energy in trying to reach someone who didn't want to be reached, I had time to think about other things. I started reading again, something I'd let slide over the years. I called my brother in Denver, whom I hadn't spoken to in months. I even started taking better care of myself, going for walks, eating better, getting more sleep. Janet, meanwhile, seemed relieved by my withdrawal. She stopped making excuses for her late nights and weekend absences. She was more relaxed around the house, humming while she got ready for work, smiling at her phone without trying to hide it. I began to realize that we'd been playing roles for years, me as the devoted husband, her as the grateful wife. And now that I'd stopped performing my part, she felt free to drop her act too. One Saturday evening in late May, Janet came home from another girls' weekend, looking happier than I'd seen her in years. She was practically glowing, moving around the kitchen with an energy that reminded me of how she used to be when we first met. "Good weekend?" I asked from my chair in the living room. "The best," she said, not elaborating. I went back to my book, but I could hear her humming in the kitchen, the sound of her unpacking and moving around with a lightness that our home hadn't contained in months. That night, as I was getting ready for bed in the guest room, an arrangement that had become permanent without either of us acknowledging it, Janet appeared in the doorway. "James, can we talk?" I set down my book and looked at her. She was wearing the silk robe I'd given her for her birthday 2 years ago, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger somehow, more like the woman I'd fallen in love with. "Sure." She came into the room and sat on the edge of the bed, something she hadn't done in months. "I feel like we've been drifting apart." The irony of the statement wasn't lost on me. She'd been the one pulling away, creating distance, investing her emotions elsewhere. But now she was concerned about our drifting? "What do you mean?" I asked. "We barely talk anymore. You seem so distant lately, like you're here, but not really here." I studied her face, looking for some sign that she understood her own role in creating this distance, but she seemed genuinely puzzled by my withdrawal, as if she couldn't connect my behavior to her own. "I've been giving you the space you said you needed," I said carefully. "I know, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe what we need is to find our way back to each other." Back to each other. The phrase might have meant something 6 months ago, before I'd read her messages to Kevin, before I'd learned that she saw our marriage as something to escape from, rather than something to nurture. "What are you saying, Janet?" She reached for my hand, her fingers warm against mine. "I'm saying maybe we should try. Really try. I miss what we used to have." I looked down at our joined hands and felt a mix of emotions I couldn't quite sort through. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to think that maybe Kevin had been a mistake she was ready to leave behind. But another part of me remembered reading about how alive she felt with him, how predictable I was, how she'd been pretending to be happy for years. "What about Kevin?" I asked quietly. Her hand went still in mine. For a long moment, she didn't speak, and I could see her mind working, trying to figure out how much I knew and how much she could still hide. "How do you know about Kevin?" "I saw your messages." She pulled her hand away and stood up, pacing to the window. "You went through my computer?" "It was open. I saw his name." She turned to face me, and I could see her weighing her options. Deny it, minimize it, or come clean. "It's not what you think," she said finally. "It's exactly what I think. You've been having an affair." The word hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. Neither of us had said it out loud before, and hearing it made everything more real somehow. Janet's shoulders sagged, and for the first time in months, she looked her age. "Yes." "For how long?" 6 months, maybe 7. "And all those weekend trips?" "Yes." I nodded, surprised by how calm I felt. Maybe I'd been preparing for this conversation longer than I realized. "Why?" I asked. She sat back down on the bed, but didn't reach for my hand this time. "I don't know. I felt trapped, I guess. Like I was just going through the motions of being married without actually feeling married." So you decided to find someone else instead of talking to me about it. I tried talking to you, James. Remember that morning in the kitchen? I told you I needed space. You told me you felt suffocated. That's not the same as asking for help with our marriage. Would it have mattered? When was the last time we had a real conversation about anything that mattered? When was the last time you surprised me, or made me laugh, or made me feel like anything other than your comfortable roommate? Her words stung because there was truth in them. We had fallen into routines, had stopped putting effort into connecting with each other. But instead of working together to fix it, she'd gone looking for excitement elsewhere. So Kevin makes you feel all those things? She looked away. He did, at first. At first? It's complicated. Try me. Janet sighed and ran her hands through her hair. When we started, whatever this is, it felt like coming alive again. He was interested in me, really interested. He wanted to know what I thought about things, what I dreamed about. He made me feel desirable and smart and funny. And now? Now I'm not sure what I want. He's talking about leaving his wife, about us being together for real. And I realized that what I loved wasn't necessarily him. It was how I felt about myself when I was with him. I processed this, trying to understand what she was telling me. So, you want to end things with him? I already did, last weekend. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. I felt something inside me shift, but I wasn't sure if it was relief or just confusion. And now what? Now I want to know if we can try again, if you're willing to work on this with me. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and tried to imagine what that would mean. Could I forget about the messages I'd read, the lies she'd told, the months of watching her light up for someone else while treating me like an afterthought? Could I trust her again? Did I even want to? I need time to think about it, I said. She nodded, and I could see she was fighting back tears. How much time? I don't know. This isn't the kind of thing you decide overnight. I know. I don't want to lose you, James. I don't want to lose us. After she left the room, I lay awake for hours thinking about what she'd said. Part of me wanted to believe that we could fix this, that her affair had been a wake-up call for both of us. But another part of me kept remembering how happy she'd looked coming home from her weekends with Kevin, how relieved she'd seemed when I stopped trying to connect with her. Was she really sorry? Or was she just sorry that Kevin wasn't willing to leave his wife for her? The next morning, Janet was already gone when I woke up. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter. Gone to see my sister. Need to clear my head. Back Sunday. We should talk then. Amy lived 3 hours away, and Janet had never driven up there without planning it weeks in advance. But I was grateful for the space. I needed time to think without her watching me, waiting for an answer I wasn't sure I had. I spent the weekend alone with Buster, walking longer routes through our neighborhood and thinking about the past 15 years. The good times, and there had been many, felt distant now, like memories from someone else's life. The bad times, which I'd always minimized, seemed more significant in light of what I now knew. Had I been as inattentive as Janet claimed? Had I stopped seeing her as a person and started treating her like a fixture in my life? The answer was probably yes, at least partially. But did that justify what she'd done? Did it matter if I'd been a less-than-perfect husband, if she'd decided to lie and cheat rather than fight for our marriage? By Sunday evening, I still didn't have answers, but I had clarity about one thing. I wasn't the same person I'd been 6 months ago. Learning about the affair, reading those messages, watching Janet invest her emotional energy elsewhere, it had changed something fundamental in how I saw myself and what I wanted from life. Janet came home around 8, looking tired and subdued. She found me in the kitchen, making dinner for one. "How is Amy?" I asked. "Good. She sends her love." Janet hesitated in the doorway. I told her about Kevin, about us. What did she say? She said I was an idiot for risking what we have. She said most people would kill for a marriage as stable as ours. Stable. Not passionate or exciting or fulfilling. Stable. Is that what you want? I asked. Stable? Janet came into the kitchen and leaned against the counter across from me. I want to be happy, James. I want us both to be happy. I thought stability was enough, but then I met Kevin and realized how much I'd been missing. And now that Kevin's out of the picture, now I want to know if we can find what was missing, if we can build something better than what we had. I turned off the stove and faced her. Janet, I've been thinking about this all weekend, and I keep coming back to the same question. Are you here because you want to be with me, or because Kevin doesn't want to be with you? She flinched as if I'd slapped her. That's not fair. Isn't it? You said he was talking about leaving his wife, and then suddenly you're back here wanting to work on our marriage. The timing is pretty convenient. It's not like that. Then what is it like? She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were filled with tears. I don't know, she whispered. I honestly don't know anymore. 6 months ago, I thought I knew what I wanted. I thought Kevin was the answer to everything that felt wrong in my life. But when he started talking about making it real, about actually being together, I realized I'd been living in a fantasy. A fantasy where I was the problem. A fantasy where everything would be perfect if I could just be with someone who understood me better. And now I know that running away doesn't solve anything. If I can't be happy with you, with a good man who loves me and has built a life with me, then maybe the problem isn't you. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in months, maybe years. But it also wasn't enough. I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully. But I can't be your consolation prize, Janet. I can't be the safe choice you settle for when the exciting option doesn't work out. You're not a consolation prize. Then why does it feel like one? She couldn't answer that, and her silence told me everything I needed to know. I think, I said slowly, that we both need to figure out who we are outside of this marriage before we can decide if we want to be in it. What does that mean? It means I think we should separate for a while, give each other real space to think about what we want. The color drained from her face. James, no, that's not what I want. What you want is to not have to face the consequences of your choices. But we're past that point now. So that's it? You're giving up on us? I'm giving us both a chance to be honest about what we actually want, instead of just defaulting to what feels safe or familiar. That night, Janet slept in our bedroom, and I stayed in the guest room, but I could hear her crying through the walls. Part of me wanted to go to her, to comfort her, to pretend that everything could go back to the way it used to be. But I'd learned something about myself over the past few months. I deserved better than being someone's second choice. The next morning, we sat down together and worked out the logistics. Janet would stay in the house, and I'd find an apartment somewhere nearby. We'd take 6 months to figure things out individually, then reassess whether we wanted to try to rebuild our marriage or make the separation permanent. It was civilized and mature, and absolutely heartbreaking. I found a small place across town, a 1-bedroom apartment in a building full of other people starting over. The walls were thin, and the carpet was old. But it was mine. For the first time in years, I could do what I wanted without considering someone else's preferences or schedule. The adjustment was harder than I expected. After 15 years of marriage, I'd forgotten how to be alone. I'd wake up at 6:30 out of habit, then remember that no one needed coffee or breakfast but me. I'd come home from work and find myself listening for Janet's car in the driveway before remembering that she wasn't coming. But slowly, I started to rediscover parts of myself that had gotten lost in the dailiness of marriage. I read books that Janet would have found boring. I listened to music that she didn't like. I ate dinner at whatever time I felt like it, sometimes standing at the kitchen counter, sometimes not at all. Janet called me a few times in those first weeks, always with some practical question about the house or our finances. But I could hear in her voice that she was struggling too, that the reality of being alone wasn't what she'd imagined when she was fantasizing about freedom from our suffocating marriage. About a month into our separation, I ran into Kevin. I was at the grocery store, debating between two different types of pasta sauce, a decision I could now make without consulting anyone, when I heard someone say my name. I turned around and found myself face to face with the man who'd been sleeping with my wife. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with the kind of carefully styled hair that suggested he spent more time in front of the mirror than I did. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot and avoiding eye contact. "James, right? I'm Kevin." I stared at him, this man who'd been part of destroying my marriage, and felt nothing. No rage, no desire to hit him, just a kind of distant curiosity. "I know who you are. Look, I want you to know that I never meant for things to get so complicated. Janet told me you two were having problems, that you were basically just roommates. I thought..." "You thought what? That it was okay to sleep with someone else's wife because she complained about being bored?" He flushed red. "It wasn't like that." "What was it like?" "I cared about her. I still care about her." "Enough to leave your wife for her?" He looked surprised that I knew about that part. "That's complicated." "I bet it is." I turned back to the pasta sauce, no longer interested in the conversation. "For what it's worth," Kevin said to my back, "I think she really loves you. She talks about you all the time." I looked at him over my shoulder. "What she loves is the security I represent, the safety net. But that's not love, Kevin. That's convenience." He opened his mouth to say something else, but I walked away, leaving him standing there with his cart full of single-guy groceries and his guilty conscience. That encounter clarified something I'd been wrestling with. Janet might think she loved me, might even believe it. But what she actually loved was the idea of me, the stable husband, the reliable provider, the man who'd always be there no matter how badly she treated him. But I wasn't that man anymore. The months of separation had shown me what it felt like to prioritize my own needs, to make decisions based on what I wanted rather than what would keep someone else happy. I liked who I was becoming. 3 months into our separation, Janet asked to meet for coffee. She looked thinner than when I'd moved out, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "How are you doing?" she asked after we'd ordered. "I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. How about you?" She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug like she was trying to warm herself. "I'm struggling. The house feels so empty. I keep thinking I hear your keys in the door, or I'll make dinner for 2 out of habit." I felt a pang of sympathy, but not the overwhelming urge to fix her pain that I would have felt before. "I'm sorry you're having a hard time." "Are you?" "Sorry, I mean. I'm sorry that you're hurting. But I'm not sorry about the separation. I think it was the right thing to do." She looked up from her coffee, hope flickering in her eyes. "Does that mean you think we might work things out?" "I think we both needed this time to figure out who we are outside of our marriage. Have you figured that out?" She was quiet for a long time, turning her mug in slow circles on the table. "I've been seeing a therapist." "That's good. She's helping me understand some things about myself, about why I made the choices I made." "Such as?" "I think I was afraid of getting older, of being invisible. With you, I felt safe, but kind of settled. Like my life was already decided, and all the exciting parts were behind me. Kevin made me feel young again, like I still had possibilities. It was a more honest explanation than I'd expected, and I appreciated that she was taking responsibility for her motivations rather than blaming me. And now? Now I realized that the problem wasn't our marriage. It was that I'd stopped growing as a person. I'd made you responsible for my happiness instead of figuring out how to be happy myself. That's quite an insight. My therapist says that's why the thing with Kevin fell apart so quickly, once it became real. I wasn't actually in love with him. I was in love with the version of myself I became around him. I nodded. It made sense, and it explained why she'd seemed so devastated when he'd started talking about leaving his wife. She hadn't been ready for the fantasy to become reality. "So, what do you want now?" I asked. "I want to be the kind of person who can be in a real partnership. Someone who brings her own happiness to the relationship instead of expecting her partner to provide it." "That sounds like a good goal. And I want to try again with you, if you're willing." I'd been dreading this moment, knowing it was coming but not sure how I'd respond. Looking at Janet across the small cafe table, I could see that she was sincere. She'd done the work to understand her mistakes, and she genuinely wanted to make amends. But I'd changed too, and what I wanted had evolved. "Janet, I think what you're saying is real, and I'm glad you're getting help. But I don't think I want to go back to what we had." Her face crumpled. "Because you can't forgive me?" "Because I've learned that I like being on my own. I like making decisions without having to consider someone else's feelings or preferences. I like the person I've become over the past few months, and I'm not sure I want to give that up. But we could build something new, something better than what we had before." "Maybe, but I don't think I want to try." The words came out more gently than I'd expected, but they were true. Sitting there with her, I realized that I wasn't angry anymore, wasn't hurt anymore. I just wasn't interested in being married to her anymore. "Is there someone else?" she asked quietly. "No, this isn't about anyone else. It's about me choosing what kind of life I want, and it doesn't include walking on eggshells around someone who might decide I'm boring again." She started crying then, quiet tears that she wiped away with her napkin. "I don't deserve another chance, do I?" "It's not about deserving. It's about wanting. And I don't want to spend the next 20 years wondering if you're truly happy with me or just making the best of a safe situation." We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us processing what this meant. After 6 months of separation, we were heading toward divorce. "I love you," she said finally. "I love you too. But love isn't always enough." The divorce proceedings were surprisingly amicable. We divided our assets fairly, sold the house, and went our separate ways without the bitterness I'd expected. Janet moved to a smaller place closer to her job, and I found a bigger apartment with room for a home office and a small garden. Kevin called me once, about a month before the divorce was finalized. He wanted to let me know that he and his wife were getting divorced too, and that he wasn't going to pursue anything with Janet. "She deserves someone who can give her a fresh start," he said. "Someone who doesn't have all the baggage I'd bring to it." I almost laughed. Here was a man who'd helped destroy 2 marriages, suddenly concerned about baggage. "That's very thoughtful of you," I said, not bothering to hide the sarcasm. "Look, I know you have every right to hate me, but I want you to know that Janet never stopped loving you, even when we were together. She'd talk about you constantly, about things you'd said or done, memories you shared." "Kevin, I appreciate the call, but this isn't helping anyone. I just thought you should know that she wasn't trying to replace you. She was trying to find herself." "And she couldn't do that within her marriage?" "Apparently not. But maybe that says more about both of us than it does about you. After I hung up, I sat in my new living room, looking out at the small balcony where I'd started growing herbs and vegetables. It was strange how other people's guilt seemed to require my participation. Both Janet and Kevin wanted me to understand their motivations, to see their affair as something more complex than simple betrayal. But understanding their reasons didn't change the fundamental fact. When faced with problems in our marriage, Janet had chosen to lie rather than communicate, to escape rather than engage. And I had chosen to accept that rather than demand better. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in September. I took the afternoon off work and went to the courthouse alone. Janet was there with her lawyer, looking small and sad in a navy blue suit I'd never seen before. We signed the papers, shook hands with our respective attorneys, and walked out into the autumn sunshine as legally single people. "Well," Janet said, standing on the courthouse steps, "I guess that's that." "I guess so." She looked like she wanted to say something else, maybe offer one final attempt at reconciliation. Instead, she just nodded and walked toward her car. I watched her drive away, waiting for some surge of emotion, regret, relief, anger, sadness. But I felt mostly calm, like I'd just completed a difficult but necessary task. That evening, my brother called from Denver. "How are you doing, little brother?" Tom asked. He'd been checking in regularly since the separation, something I appreciated more than I'd expected. "I'm good. Really good, actually." "No second thoughts?" "None. Is that weird?" Tom laughed. "Hell no. You know what's weird? Staying married to someone who treats you like a backup plan." We talked for an hour, catching up on his kids, his job, his wife's latest gardening obsessions. Normal conversation between brothers who'd lost touch with each other during my marriage and were now rebuilding that connection. After we hung up, I realized something. I hadn't laughed this much in years. Not the polite chuckles that pass for humor in a strained marriage, but real laughter at Tom's stories about his teenage son's latest mishaps. I started dating about a year after the divorce. Nothing serious at first. Just coffee meetings with women I met through friends or online. It was strange being single at 63, learning the rhythms of new relationships after 15 years of marriage. The first woman I had dinner with, Carol, was recently divorced herself. Over pasta and wine, she told me about her ex-husband's midlife crisis, his affair with his dental hygienist, the awkward custody arrangements for their teenage daughter. "Do you think about going back?" she asked. "Even after everything?" I considered the question seriously. "No. I think about the good times sometimes, but I don't want to relive them. I want to see what comes next." She smiled. "That's the healthiest thing I've heard anyone say about divorce in months." Carol and I dated for a few months, but ultimately decided we were better as friends. She was still processing her anger about her ex-husband's betrayal, and I was more interested in building something new than rehashing old wounds. Then I met Louise at a bookstore reading. She was there for the same author I was, a mystery writer whose work I'd discovered during my separation. We ended up having coffee afterward, talking about books and movies, and the strange experience of starting over later in life. Louise was 60, never married, a retired teacher who'd spent her career focused on her students rather than finding a husband. She had silver hair she wore short, laugh lines around her eyes, and an easy comfort with herself that I found incredibly attractive. "I've been alone so long, I'm not sure I know how to be part of a couple," she admitted on our third date. "I've been part of a couple so long, I'm not sure I know how to be alone," I replied. "Maybe we can figure it out together." We took things slowly. Louise had her own apartment, her own friends, her own routines. She volunteered at the library, took art classes, traveled with a group of retired teachers every spring. She had a full life that didn't need me to complete it, and I found that enormously appealing. When we decided to move in together after 18 months, it was because we wanted to share our lives, Not because either of us needed rescuing or security or validation. We kept both apartments for 6 months, just to be sure, before finally choosing mine and turning hers into Louise's art studio. 2 years after my divorce was finalized, Janet called me on a Sunday afternoon. I was in the kitchen making lunch while Louise worked in the garden, and when I saw her name on the caller ID, I almost didn't answer. "Hi, James." Her voice sounded different, lighter somehow. "Hi, Janet. How are you?" "I'm good, really good. I wanted to call and tell you something." I braced myself, not sure what to expect. "Okay. I'm engaged." I felt a flutter of surprise, then genuine happiness for her. "That's wonderful. Tell me about him." "His name was Paul," she said. "He was a widower she'd met in her therapist's waiting room, of all places. They'd been dating for 8 months, taking it slow, building something based on honesty rather than fantasy. He knows everything about Kevin, about our marriage, about why it ended, and he still wants to be with me. That's what you deserve, Janet. Someone who sees all of you and chooses to stay." "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly, "for not taking me back when I asked, for making me figure out who I was on my own first." "You don't need to thank me for that." "Yes, I do. If you'd said yes, if we'd tried to put things back together, I would have just fallen back into the same patterns. I needed to learn how to be happy by myself before I could be happy with someone else." We talked for a few more minutes, and when I hung up, I felt genuinely glad that she'd found someone who could give her what she needed. Louise came in from the garden, dirt under her fingernails and satisfaction on her face. "Who was that?" she asked, washing her hands at the kitchen sink. "My ex-wife. She's getting married." Louise turned to look at me, studying my expression. "How do you feel about that?" "Happy for her, and grateful that it's not me." Louise laughed, the sound filling our kitchen with warmth. "That's very evolved of you. Or very selfish. I like my life the way it is now." There's nothing selfish about knowing what makes you happy and choosing it. That evening, as we sat on our small balcony watching the sunset, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain of discovering Janet's affair, the loneliness of separation, the fear of starting over in my 60s. All of it had led to this quiet contentment with a woman who chose me every day, not because she needed me, but because she enjoyed me. "What are you thinking about?" Louise asked, following my gaze to the sky painted pink and gold. "Just how strange life is. How the worst thing that ever happened to me might have been the best thing too." She reached over and took my hand, her fingers warm and steady in mine. "The worst thing that happened to you was staying in a marriage that made you both unhappy for as long as you did." "Maybe. But if I hadn't stayed, I might not have learned what I actually wanted." "Which is what?" I looked at her, this woman who'd come into my life when I'd finally stopped looking for someone to complete me and started learning how to be complete on my own. "This," I said simply, "someone who sees me clearly and still wants to stick around." Louise smiled and squeezed my hand. "I can think of worse ways to spend whatever time we have left." As the sun disappeared behind the buildings and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, I realized that I'd finally learned something Janet had tried to teach me years ago, though not in the way she'd intended. Closeness might be optional, but choosing it freely, without desperation or fear, or the need to be rescued, makes all the difference. I never thought I'd be grateful for the day my wife told me she'd been having an affair, but sitting there with Louise, planning our quiet retirement together, I understood that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a better one. The strange thing about betrayal, I've learned, is that it doesn't always destroy you. Sometimes it just shows you who you really are when everything you thought you could depend on falls away. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you discover that the person you are on your own is someone worth knowing. 3 months ago, I received an invitation to Janet and Paul's wedding. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends, and I was surprised to be included. Louise and I talked about whether I should go, and, in the end, we decided together that it would be a nice way to close that chapter of my life completely. The wedding was held in a small garden venue across town. Janet looked radiant in a simple cream-colored dress, and Paul, a tall, gentle-looking man with kind eyes, couldn't seem to stop smiling at her. During the ceremony, I watched them exchange vows they'd written themselves, promises about honesty and growth and choosing each other every day. At the reception, Janet found me at our table and asked if we could talk privately. We stepped out onto a small patio overlooking the garden where she'd just gotten married. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It means more to me than you know." "I'm glad I could be here. You look happy." "I am. Happier than I've been in years." She paused, looking out at the gardens. "James, I need you to know something. What I did to you, what I did to us. It wasn't about you not being enough. It was about me not knowing how to be enough for myself." "I know that now." "Do you?" "Because I worried for a long time that you thought it was your fault somehow. I looked at this woman I'd once planned to grow old with, now starting a new life with someone else, and felt only peace. Janet, we weren't right for each other. Not the way we were then. Maybe we could have learned how to be, but we didn't. And that's okay." "You're not angry anymore?" "I haven't been angry for a long time. Hurt took longer to get over, but even that's gone now." She smiled, and for a moment, I could see traces of the young woman I'd fallen in love with at that company picnic all those years ago. "Paul says I talk about you sometimes. Not in a way that bothers him, but like someone remembering a different version of themselves. That's what you are to me, too. A reminder of who I used to be. Do you miss him? That version of yourself?" I considered the question seriously. The James who'd been married to Janet was a good man, but he'd been smaller somehow. More afraid, less sure of his own worth. "No," I said finally. "I like who I am better now." Janet nodded, understanding. "Me too. About myself, I mean." We hugged goodbye. A real hug, not the awkward embrace of people trying to prove they're over their history. When I returned to the reception, Louise was chatting with an elderly couple at our table, and she looked up at me with a questioning smile. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Everything's perfect," I said, and meant it. As we drove home that evening, Louise was quiet, looking out the passenger window at the city lights. "Regrets?" she asked finally. "About what?" "Seeing her so happy with someone else." I reached over and took her hand. "The only regret I have is that it took me so long to figure out what I actually wanted from life." "And what's that?" "Someone who chooses to be with me, not because they need me to complete them, but because they like who they are when they're with me. Someone who makes me feel the same way." Louise lifted our joined hands to her lips and kissed my knuckles. "I think we both got lucky then." "I think so too." Now, as I finish writing this story, Louise is in her studio working on a painting of the small garden we've created on our balcony. I can hear her humming, a sound that has become the soundtrack of my contentment. In a few minutes, I'll go in and ask if she wants tea, and we'll sit together and talk about our day, about the book I'm reading, or the friend she had lunch with, or the vacation we're planning for next spring. It's not the life I imagined when I was 35 and thought I had everything figured out. It's better than that. It's the life I chose after I learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to stop trying to make something work that was never meant to be. If you're reading this because you recognize something in my story, the distance, the lies, the feeling of being taken for granted in your own marriage, I can't tell you what to do. Every situation is different, and every person has to decide what they can and can't live with. But I can tell you this: you deserve to be with someone who sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. You deserve to feel valued and respected, and genuinely wanted, not just tolerated or settled for. And if you're not getting those things where you are, it's okay to choose differently. It's okay to choose yourself. The day I stopped being Janet's safety net was the day I started building a life that was actually worth living. And while I wouldn't wish the pain of betrayal on anyone, I'm grateful for where it led me. Sometimes the thing that breaks your heart is the same thing that sets you free.